So I was walking around my house the other day, most likely checking myself out in the mirror, and I said to myself, F it, let's do another preview. So here we go. Here's my breakdown of all 24 teams in Major League Soccer's 24th season. And as a reminder, there are 12 teams in each conference, but there's a new playoff format this time around. The top 7 teams in each conference are going to qualify for the playoffs, and the number 1 seed is going to get a bye in the first round. The other 6 teams are going to play in a one-off game. And actually, there are no more two-legged affairs in the playoffs at all. So once they get through that round of one-offs, then they're going to play another one-off all the way to the final. And the best part is whoever has the best record gets to host that game. So it's important that you show up during the regular season. You can't phone it in if you want to make a deep run in the playoffs, or at least that's what I'm suggesting. Anyway, that is for another time, the playoffs, because we're going to focus on the regular season and what's going to happen through 34 games, and then we can deal with that later. We're going to start with the Eastern Conference, and I'm going to pull names out of this mug. And I know you love this mug, but you can't have it, it's mine. And it's the Montreal Impact, whose supporters, for whatever reason, seem to be more concerned about the performance of their rivals Toronto FC than their actual club at times. Though, I guess that's natural, right? Because when I see Manchester United roll out a tweet, usually the first comments and snide remarks are from Liverpool fans. So I guess it's everywhere. Anyway, what I love about Montreal for this upcoming season is that there wasn't much off-season turmoil for the first time in what seems like forever. There was no coaching change, and there was no drama surrounding contracts for key players, specifically one of the most underrated players in MLS history for me, Nacho Piatti, who continues to get better with age. I love that guy. So everything seems peaceful up there. And in many ways, it seems like Montreal has found their inner chi. Namaste, Montreal. However, even with the addition of striker Max Ciaruti, who likes to score the odd big goal from time to time, and the return of stud center back Zakaria Diallo, who missed all of last season due to an Achilles injury, I still don't feel like Montreal is going to have enough to crack the top 7 out of 12 teams in the Eastern Conference, and they're going to miss the playoffs, and I hope I'm wrong, but that's how I'm feeling right now, so I'm going to say 8th. And next up is... It was in there, I had it. The reigning Supporters Shield winners, which is, if you don't know, the trophy that's given to the team that has the best regular season record after all 34 games, which is the league champion pretty much everywhere else. But here, it's just the top seed in the playoffs, and it's the New Jersey Red Bulls who couldn't turn that top seed in the playoffs into an MLS Cup trophy after they lost to the eventual champions Atlanta United in the conference final. But they tried, right? And isn't that enough? No, not for this fan base who never saw a playoff game that they did not want to attend, which means the players are going to have to double their efforts to get the fans to commit to dealing with the unfortunate public transportation issues that exist outside Red Bull Arena. And by doubling their efforts, I mean by not losing any games. And yes, I know they lost Tyler Adams to RB Leipzig, and their talented number 10 Kaku and his agent were like, oh, we want to go. We want to play in Mexico City with Club America. And the Red Bulls were like, absolutely not. Stop pouting already. You're with us. We're going to do big things this year because of you. So you got to stay. And hopefully that happens, because I feel like the team needs to play even better to get people to care about what's happening. And people, listen, you have a talented team on your hands. They're on the verge of doing very special things. You should go out and watch. And even though I know they're not going to go undefeated, they are going to compete for another Supporter Shield. And that matters, and it should matter to you first. All right, let's see who's up next. It's the Chicago Fire, who, after failing to qualify for the World Cup last summer, inside joke, they then went on to fail to qualify for the playoffs after being the 3rd worst team in the league, which you think would potentially prompt the firing of their main man in charge, Veljko Paunovic, but instead, they gave the guy a new contract in the offseason, which means that's the type of team that I want to work for. A team that sticks by their guy in bad times and then rewards mediocrity. Sounds amazing. Anyway, to get to the specifics, I'm going to keep this simple. If every player on their team plays 50 times better than they did last season, then I'm anticipating a big playoff run of crashing out in the first round. But if they can't muster that, I'm going to say 10th. And up next, it's... Oh no. The New England Revolution, which is also known as owner Bob Kraft's 275th favorite thing to care about in his life. Well, actually, we should probably make that 276, given what Mr. Kraft has been doing in his free time off the field. You guys know what I'm talking about. But anyway, even with legendary American goalkeeper Brad Friedel continuing to be in charge, even though he failed to make the playoffs in his first ever year coaching, I can't believe that he got a job actually without any coaching experience. So maybe that's how it goes. He's the Gary Neville of MLS. Is that such a bad thing? The Thierry Henry of MLS. The Thierry Henry at Monaco of MLS. Regardless, I just don't think this team is going to be any better than they were last season. So my hope is that all the players get into a circle in the locker room after the game and then are forced to blame their teammates as to what went wrong. Because that sounds like one hell of an idea to solve all kinds of problems. And I'm just kidding, who would do that? Maybe a first-year coach, but not a second-year one. So let's chalk up this season for the Revs like we do in recent years as a tax write-off for their owners. 9th. Now who do we got? DC United, who, and I say this after being pretty snarky on these last two teams that I mentioned, are pretty f***ing good, DC. And I mean it. They have two of the most exciting players in the league in Lucho Acosta and Wayne Rooney. They solidified their defense by signing a starting right back from Boca Juniors, Leonardo Jara. They got a promising young attacking midfielder from Estudiantes, Lucas Rodriguez. They're on a 10-game unbeaten streak because I don't really count them losing in penalties as them actually losing. It's more like losing a coin flip. So they are feeling it, man. And they got that brand new stadium that's still less than a year old. And it just feels like everything is starting to fall in place for them. So I'm going second. I'm saying second. And next up is... Jesus, I write small. The Philadelphia Union, who never saw an Open Cup final that they did not want to lose. And yes, I'm pretty sure some Philly fans are like, I hate you, I've always hated you, never allowed our stadium again. Listen, I'm just stating the facts, okay? Just win one. Anyway, that was your third loss in 3 tries. Would have been your first trophy in the trophy cabinet, but alas, it wasn't meant to be. But you're gonna do what all Philly sports teams do when they're in the dumps. They're gonna pick themselves up off the ground and continue to fight and get after it. And this year, more than any other year, Philly are going for it. They recently signed Mexican international Marco Fabian, who I believe is gonna have a Wayne Rooney-like effect on the rest of the team and raise the games of everyone around him, including 24-year-old striker Sergio Santos, who just got signed from a team in Chile and had a pretty decent career down there. However, the attack isn't my concern in any way for Philly this season, specifically because of Fabian. It's the back four. They have options, but they're still a little young and they feel a little unsettled in the outside back positions because nobody stepped up and made it their own, and they're switching formations, but they do have one of the best goalkeepers in the league behind them in Andre Blake, so that can only be seen as a positive. So if these guys can figure it out and get on the same page, I think they're going places. 4th. And now let's see here. It is FC Cincinnati, who bought their ticket into MLS, which comes with so much hope and puppy dogs and rainbows and new logos. But once you have this ticket, you have to take the ride. And I feel like that ride is going to be very bumpy because only 4 expansion teams in the history of the league have ever qualified for the playoffs in their first season, and 2 of those were coached by Bob Bradley. Unfortunately for them, they do not have Bob Bradley as their main man in charge. However, they do have a good person in Alan Koch, who was very successful as their coach in the 2nd division in the USL, and who has put together a very good collection of players that have plenty of experience, so they could do some damage. My only fear is that there's going to be a lot of learning on the fly until these players get used to playing with each other, at which point they could be halfway or more than halfway through this season before they start to gel. So even though they have this dark horse quality to them on paper, when you're an expansion team, respect isn't given, it's earned. So they have to earn a lot of respect from people like me that are watching, the opponents, all that good stuff. So I just feel like it's gonna be a bit of a struggle, but they're gonna learn a lot. So let's say 11th. And okay, wait, how many more do we have in the East? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And the next one up is NYCFC, who, after the first 7 or 8 games of last season, if you remember this, they looked amazing. They were the team to beat. And then they lost their manager, Patrick Vieira, to Nice, and then some key players got hurt, and that led to them winning only 3 games in the last 3 months of the season, which saw them almost miss the playoffs, but they did make it, and they got past the first round, which is the farthest they've ever been, but they lost to eventual champions Atlanta United in the conference semifinals. This season, though, they feel more unknown, especially without former league MVP and the face and heart and soul and captain and leading scorer of the team, David Villa, leaving to go to Japan to play with Andres Iniesta. And I don't blame him for that because I would love to go play with Andres Iniesta. But they made some key signings, most notably Alex Matrica, who is banging goals in for fun in Romania. So we'll see how he does here because from what I understand, he could be a diamond in the rough. And the Pigeons, which has to be one of the best nicknames in all of MLS, so they should embrace it, have got a nice batch of young players, and frankly, too many to name, but they're not my concern. My concern is over their manager, Domenic Turan, who is best known for being Pep Guardiola's assistant for many, many years, because when he took over for Vieira last season, and there's just no other way of saying this, the team got worse. But maybe with the full off season and a chance to add or subtract the players that he has on his squad, things will be different. But then I'm not so sure because he's been an assistant for so long. I just don't know if he's the right guy for the club to become a super club that I know and we all know that they're aching to be. Because he has that number 2 mentality, you know? They need him to be the top banana, the head cheese, the big enchilada. But he's a number 2. I think that's going to work against him despite the talent that they have on their team. 5th. And now, drum roll please. It's Orlando City. Now, even though they sent me a jersey, and I appreciate it, thank you very much, they were not good last season. In fact, they gave up more goals than any other team in MLS regular season history. 74 goals they gave up in 34 games. 74. Just wrap your head around that. It's just, what? And then they scored the second least amount of goals in the league as well, so they had a goal difference of minus 31. Which is unacceptable on so many different levels that I don't even know where to start. Other than to say that if you want me to wear this jersey with pride, Orlando, then you gotta get your shit together on both sides of the ball. Now, the signing of Nani is going to help, but he can't play all 11 positions at once. So even though I feel like your team is not gonna finish dead last like last season, I'm gonna put you there until you give me a reason to believe. And no, stop. I don't want to hear it, okay? You guys were a dumpster fire last season, so prove me wrong. And yup, let's do this. Who's next? It's the Columbus Crew, who, after their tumultuous off-the-field drama last season where it looked like they were going to disappear and go to Austin, Texas, well, they got saved. They are staying, and they have some new, ambitious owners who are dedicated to building something special with the Crew in Columbus. So everything is looking roses. Or it was, until their manager Greg Berhalter left to go coach the U.S. men's national team. But then they got saved by Ohio native and former MLS Coach of the Year Caleb Porter, who is now taking over. And a fun fact about Caleb, his only MLS Cup win with the Portland Timbers came in Columbus against the Crew, so he's got some good mojo in the city. And he's going to be joined by one of the top executives in the league, Tim Bezabachenko, who is responsible for building the empire in Toronto, which is kind of crumbling right now, so maybe he got out at a good time. But when you add these two guys into what's happening in Columbus, the future is very bright. But I don't know how bright it's going to be this season. I think it's going to take him a few years, so I'm going to say 6th. And now I think we're down to the last 2 MLS Cup winners. As crazy as that is, Toronto and Atlanta. And it's going to be Atlanta United. And honestly, the reigning champions, I was super impressed with them because on the last day of the season, they were in the running. If they just needed to get a win in Toronto to become the Supporters' Shield winners, and they got their asses kicked by Toronto, what was arguably the best performance that Toronto put together all season. But Atlanta just shook it off. No big deal. We got this. And they steamrolled everybody in the playoffs to win MLS Cup. And because of that mentality and because of the talent that they have on their team, they have to be the favorites to win it all again this year. In addition to that, even though they lost one of their key players in Miguel Almiron to Newcastle, and I can't thank Almiron enough for going to Newcastle because they needed you and they're my favorite English club, Atlanta signed the reigning South American Player of the Year, Pity Martinez from River Plate, so there's not going to be much of a drop-off, if any, with him in the team to replace Miguel Almiron. And Atlanta kept most of the core intact, most notably reigning league MVP Joseph Martinez, who inked a new 5-year deal. So player-wise, they're good. It's the new manager Frank de Boer, who's taken over for the very influential Tata Martino, who left to go coach the Mexican national team, that I'm worried about. I'm not sold on him because the last 2 times that he coached outside of a league and a club and a country that he's very comfortable in, and I'm talking about Ajax and Holland's top division, the Eredivisie, he's been bad. He went to Italy for Inter Milan and really struggled, and then he went to Crystal Palace in England and only lasted 5 games, and now he's here. This is his next stop. So if I was an Atlanta fan, I'd be a little concerned because a truly good manager should be good anywhere, right? Plus, I'm gonna say there's gonna be a dip in form after they won it all last season. And they're gonna have a target on their back like they never had before, which is a normal occurrence in these types of things. So I'm gonna say 3rd. And finally, it's the last team in the Eastern Conference, and I already know who it is, so I don't even need this mug. It's Toronto FC, who did the impossible 2 seasons ago by winning the treble, and then followed that up by doing the impossible by not making the playoffs as reigning champions, which is pretty hard to do. So I wonder, and this is the big question, which version of Toronto are we gonna get this season? I'm leaning towards the latter. With their best players, Sebastian Jovinko and the man pulling the strings in the front office, Tim Bezabachenko, both saying, peace out. And with their other big names like Captain Michael Bradley and Josie Altidore getting a year older, and with all the other players just not playing to their potential, which was on full display recently when they got easily dispatched of by Independiente from Panama 5-1 over 2 legs in the CONCACAF Champions League. This has the hallmarks of being another dismal season for TFC, but I am a big fan of their coaching staff. I've known them for many years. They're smart guys, and I believe that they're going to cobble something together and get that last playoff spot. So I think they're going to get in 7th. And now let's head out to the Western Conference, because things are going to be very tight on this side of things this season. I can feel it because the teams that were bad have been making moves to not be bad this season, and the teams that were in the middle are working real hard to get to the top, and the teams at the top are trying to maintain their status, which is a really long way of me saying that the West is truly going to be wild. Wild. Well, you know what? It's still going to be better than the East, who are least. Who's first? It's FC Dallas, the team that almost finished first in the West before falling short and getting in 4th and then losing in the first round of the playoffs, which seems to be their MO in recent years, which is a shame because they have so much talent, but then they run out of gas at the end when the games matter the most. Anyway, their coach, Oscar Pereira, ended up leaving after it was all over to join the Tijuana Zolos Cholos in Liga MX. So they promoted within and hired longtime academy coach and one of my former teammates, 38-year-old Luchi Gonzalez, to take over, which makes him the second youngest coach in MLS. So if you factor in his youth as a coach, along with FC Dallas's philosophy of playing young players because they have a great academy and one of the best in the whole country, and the fact that they got rid of 10 players from last season and added 7 new ones, that's a lot of turnover. I just get the sense that this year is going to be a bit of a feeling out process, so I'll say 9th. And up next, it's Real Salt Lake, who might be neck and neck with FC Dallas with regard to playing the talent that they develop in their own academy, and I have a lot of respect for that. And they're also coached by one of the most outspoken people in the game in this country, Mike Petke, which makes him one of my favorite people to watch because his post-game press conferences are next level. He speaks from the heart, he speaks with no filter, and his passion and energy and enthusiasm for the game is infectious. You just wish that this passion and energy and enthusiasm would make RSL more consistent, because they were awesome in some games last year. They were scoring goals for fun, but then they would have games where they would let in some really bad goals. And I think that kind of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde type of performances really hindered them from finding the rhythm that I think we all can see they're capable of. But with another offseason under his belt, I think Petke and his staff and his players are going to figure it out. They're going to challenge for a playoff spot. I'm saying 5th. And now let's head to where exactly? Oh, it's LA, where I grew up, and LAFC. So in their first ever year of existence, LAFC finished 3rd in the Western Conference to make the playoffs. They finished 5th in the race for the Supporter Shield, and they lost in the semifinals of the Open Cup to the eventual champions Houston Dynamo. So last season can only be considered as a kick-ass debut for Bob Bradley and his men. So the question is, can they replicate last season's success or even better it? Or will other teams have figured them out this season so they won't do as well? For me, it's hard to say because they didn't taste any real success last year. They only offered glimpses of what could be possible. So I'm gonna safely assume they're naturally gonna be hungry to want more. And if they're not, then I 100% guarantee you, stamp it, that Bob Bradley will whip them into shape both mentally and physically. So I'm gonna say 3rd again. I don't think they're gonna suffer any sophomore slump, and I think they're gonna, at the very least, match what they did last season. And now let's head to Vancouver, where it seems like they got out their dry erase board with everybody's name on it, coaches and players, and said, you know what, we're gonna erase almost everybody, including longtime coach and former player for the club, Carl Robinson, and just said, we're gonna start over. That's what we're doing. We're completely starting over. In fact, they are looking like they will start the season with only 4 returning starters from last season's squad, which is wild. But I'm a big fan of their coach, Mark Dos Santos, because, well, for a lot of reasons, but this one is the most impressive to me because in his first ever year as coach of the San Francisco Deltas, in their first ever year of existence, he brought them the championship in the NASL, and that is super impressive, and it proves that he knows how to bring a group of players together and build something special. My only fear is that the Western Conference is very intense this season, so I don't know if he can get it done in year 1, but year 2 under Mark Dos Santos, and to borrow a phrase from what the kids say these days, or maybe what they used to say, it's gonna be lit, fam. But for this season, they're going to finish in 8th. And up next, it's the Colorado Rapids, also known as Tim Howard's last ever club since he announced that he was going to retire at the end of the season. So the question is, will his teammates raise their games this season and actually try to defend at any point, because they gave up 63 goals in 34 games. And then maybe, and this is just me playing Captain Obvious here, they should try scoring some goals too. They were the worst team in the league in goals for. They had 36 goals in 34 games, and that's not good enough. And also, when your attack is not good, it puts a lot of pressure on your defense to have to be perfect. And we don't need Tim Howard to be perfect. He's already proved that time and time again. Let him relax in his last season. Let him smoke a cigarette back there. Let him hang out. However, with the additions of Benny Feilhaber, and Kai Kamara, which should give the team a much needed boost of personality and leadership in the spine of the team and in the locker room. Plus, we all know that Tim is going to want to go out on a high note. So I expect him to play as well as he ever has. The problem is, you're only as good as the players around you. And if they're not playing well, Tim can only do so much. So I'm going to put the Rapids dead last until proven otherwise. But I'm happy to eat my words at the end of the season, Rapids players, coaches, and fans, so we'll see if I do. And then up next, it's the LA Galaxy, who have won more MLS Cups than anyone else, and they're never afraid to remind you of that fact. And I've got no problem with that, actually, because I'm a shameless self-promoter as well. Roll the clip. Don't roll the clip, I'm just kidding. So I know one when I see one, and I see you guys. I see you, LA Galaxy. Also, they have one of the coolest motherfuckers to have ever laced them up, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, on their team, and that is awesome. And they have one of the coolest people I've ever met in the game, Guillermo Barros Schelotto, who is their new head coach, who comes over from Boca Juniors. So on paper, it looks like they have a lot of pieces in place. Until you remember that they have the incredibly underwhelming and overpaid Giovanni Dos Santos on their team, which is forcing the Galaxy to move the cheaper and more reliable and higher producing Ola Kamara to China, so that they can meet the league rules of only having 3 DPs on their roster. But maybe even more important than the DP situation is the status of their back four and goalkeeper, who for me is the weakest link on the team. If those guys can tighten things up, and they showed glimpses of being solid last year, but just not enough glimpses, then the Galaxy could have a good season. But if they play like they did last year, it's gonna be all over the place. And I really feel like the Galaxy are gonna have to ride or die with their performances. However, the new coach, Guillermo Barros Schelotto, is a winner. He won a ton of trophies as a player. He won trophies as a manager. The guy knows what it takes to win, as does his best player, Zlatan Ibrahimovic, who's coming off a nice, long offseason, which means he's going to be raring to go. And the fact that Zlatan committed to LA when he still had interest to maybe go back in Europe, I think he's going to be into it, and more so than last year. So you combine those two mentalities of the two most important figures on the team, Schelotto and Zlatan, and I think that's just going to raise the game of everybody else. But again, they're only going to go as far as their defense and goalkeeper, no matter how many goals Zlatan scores. I know they'll address that moving forward, but I'm going to say 6th. And now who is up? It's the Seattle Sounders, who, to brace everyone that's unaware, they start the season really slow. Like, they're about to fire their manager slow, but then for whatever reason, after the All-Star break, everything just starts to make sense, and they never lose a game the rest of the way unless it's in penalties, which is what happened when they lost in the playoffs last season. But that speaks to their mentality at that time of year when the games matter the most. And now with the return of 2016 MLS Rookie of the Year Jordan Morris, who missed all of last season with an injury, along with Raul Ruidiaz, their striker from last year, who scored a bunch of goals but probably needed a nice offseason to get some rest. He probably didn't have that for a while. Coupled with stud playmaker Nicolas Ladero, their attack is going to be flying as long as they can stay healthy. And then you add in the fact that they have so much experience and quality everywhere else in the field. This team looks set up to have a great season, except for maybe in the defensive mid position, because they lost longtime servant of the club and captain Ozzie Alonso to Minnesota. So I don't think they're going to fill that void just yet, but they will in time. And while they're figuring it out, I think they're going to have a kick-ass season. I'm going to say 2nd. Wow, speaking of Ozzie Alonso, it's his new club, Minnesota United, who finally are leaving the New England Revolution type digs that they've been in for the last 2 seasons of crappy sports turf and NFL football lines to play in a proper stadium, Allianz Field, which already looks to be one of the best stadiums in the whole league, which means the quality of the play on the field needs to match it, you know? Like the drapes need to match the carpet. That could be too much of a visual for you, but you know what I'm trying to say. So no pressure, Minnesota, because after conceding 71 goals last season, which hurts my soul as a former defender, it's clear where the emphasis should be in the offseason, and thankfully their coach Adrian Heath addressed those concerns by bringing in a veteran as savvy as Alonso to protect the back four, and the 2017 MLS Defender of the Year Ike Opara from Kansas City. Those 2 signings are going to make a tremendous difference. However, as much as I like what's going on with the club, I don't feel like all the pieces are in place for them to do what they want to do just yet, but they're inching closer to that. So this year, I feel like the top highlight, the top talking point is going to be how great the stadium is as the quality of play tries to catch up to its incredible surroundings. So I'm going to say 11th. And now who do we got next? Oh, it's the Rose City, baby. Keep Portland weird, where the Timbers shook off a slow start to last season under new manager Giovanni Savarese to make it all the way to the MLS Cup final, where they lost to the better team on that day, Atlanta United. But let's be honest, it always felt like they overachieved to get there, like they were playing with house money after finishing 5th in the Western Conference. But with the return of all their core players, most notably the string puller and former league MVP Diego Valeri, who is a baller, by the way, that's important. But maybe even more important than that, they know what this first-year coach, or now his second year, is all about. They know how he communicates, what he likes, what he doesn't like, how the team is going to play, how the culture is. Everything is set up and ready to go, and I think that's going to allow them to start very, very well next season. So if they make it back to the final, I don't think it will be due to overachieving, or we won't describe it that way. They'll have earned it a little bit different. They earned it last time. I'm not going to try to say that they didn't. They won some big games and scored some big goals and got there because they earned it. But I think you know what I'm trying to say. Anyway, they still need a number 9. And if they can find that, then I think they will do even better than my prediction, which is 4th. And next up is the Houston Dynamo, who are last season's Open Cup winners, but then they couldn't qualify for the playoffs as one of the top 6 teams in their own conference. And that just kind of defies logic for me in some ways. But it's probably the best way to describe this group, where they were unstoppable in some games, but then they were hardly recognizable as the same team in others. So consistency is going to be key. And consistency for me, to quote an old coach of mine, Bob Gansler, is doing the simple things perfect every time. And I think that's going to be Houston's biggest challenge this season. How well can they execute the things that are expected of them, no matter what the situation? Or said in another way, do they have enough players that know how to make plays? Frankly, I think this Houston team is going to be up for it. And if you add in the fact that this is the 3rd year in charge for Wilmer Cabrera, and in year 3, your fingerprints are all over the team at this point, I think he's going to get the most out of his guys. The guys are going to want to play for him, and they're going to get into the playoffs 7th. And now we are down to 2. And if I'm not mistaken, they're the 2 clubs that I used to play for.
Wow.
And the first one we're talking about is the San Jose Earthquakes, who I owe the whole world to after they gave me my first shot in MLS, though we could argue that I repaid that favor by helping them win their first ever MLS Cup. I think we're square. Anyway, as much as I would love to say that these current Earthquakes are going to be vying for MLS Cup this season, it's just not going to happen. And that's with the incredible hire of Matias Almeida as their manager, whose 2 previous stints as the main man in charge were with Chivas Guadalajara and River Plate. So he has plenty of experience in difficult situations. And given the fact that San Jose were the worst team in the league last season, he's walking right into a difficult situation that needs an immediate fix. Unfortunately for him, he still has the bulk of the previous manager's team as his core, because all those guys are locked into multi-year guaranteed contracts. But that changes next year, which is when I think that San Jose is going to start taking steps to being a top-tier team again. So this season, even though it's probably not going to lend itself to success, is going to be very important because it's going to allow Almeida to set the culture, the identity, and the style of play, and really laying the groundwork for future success. So you can't discount what's happening here and now, but it's not going to really lend itself to being way up the table and maybe even making the playoffs. So I'm gonna say 10th. And then finally, it's the Sporting Kansas City Wizards. I didn't even need to do that because there was only one left, who are the team that I spent the most with in my career, 8 years in total. So I am extremely biased when I say that they're gonna be the best team in the West. They're gonna win the Supporters Shield and the Open Cup and the MLS Cup and the CONCACAF Champions League to become the first team in MLS history to win 4 trophies in a season, so suck it, haters. Okay, fine, that might have been a little aggressive, but they finished on top of the West last year, and they made moves in this offseason to solidify that status. Plus, they're thinking like winners by expecting to win every competition that they're in, and that mentality matters. Which means I'm fully expecting them to win 2 out of the 4 trophies that I mentioned. But I'd settle for 1. I'd be happy with 2 and buzzing for 4. I'm skipping 3 here. Yeah, obviously. A treble? Whoa, that'd be ridiculous. Anyway, these guys are finishing first in the regular season. You know it, I know it, everybody knows it, so suck it, haters. Anyway, that is it. That is all I got except for this. Join my MLS Fantasy League, which I'll leave the link in the description below. And if you win it, I will fly to your house and play a pickup game with you and your friends, so good luck. And of course, good luck to all of the MLS teams this season. It's gonna be a great one. Later.